Welcome into an episode of the News4JAGs podcast. I'm Jamal St here alongside Justin Barney. Justin, this is the annual NFL Owners Week. Some rule changes coming now.
Big time.
Look, this is a busy week. I know it's lead up to the draft, so a lot of our shows are on that. But we heard from Doug Pederson this week. First time that Doug's talked since the free agent kind of frenzy that the Jaguars went on. Also, a few rule changes around the NFL. No more hip drop tackle, which is... That's a tangent-worthy topic on its own. Also, the kickoff is changing. So we'll see how some of those things impact. But we want to kind of listen to some of the stuff that Doug Pederson said and kind of talk about what we think he meant slash where we think that's going to take this team over the course of it. I thought Doug was very candid and open while he was down there in Orlando for the owners' meetings.
You had a chance to go down and see him and hear from Doug, and really, I mean, we have not heard from Doug in forever, it seems like, and interesting to hear his take on free agents and just where the Jags are at right now. I thought it was interesting that he said, "You hope so," when asked about if they're better now than they were after Week 18 last year. And I don't know if the Jags are better now. I mean, you're not going to be able to really know that until I think after the draft and when things come around. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I don't feel as comfortable now with this team as I did in Week 18 last year. I mean, I think you still have a lot of question marks on this team, and I think the draft will help answer some of those. But, I'm still a little incomplete right now.
Hey, look, I think they've done some good things, and it seems like they feel pretty comfortable about some of the things they've done. But since you brought up last season, you brought up Week 18, why don't we start there? So the end of last season was it was a doozy. I mean, this team started 8-3 and then came crashing down back to reality in a spectacular form. Well, not in good spectacular, but it was bad. So Doug Pederson talked a little bit about, I mean, he's now had some time to reflect on that moment and said, look, that's something that he's not going to be moving past in the near future. It's something that's going to stick with him, at least as the coach of the team, for a good while.
For me, it's not so much that loss as much as it is the last 6 games. When we were sitting there at 8-3 and we had everything going for us and right in front of us, I don't know if I'll ever get over it. I think for me, it's going to be my motivation, my fuel, moving forward. And I'm not going to let it cloud the vision, but at the same time, it's going to be close in my mind as I move forward with the team this spring.
All right, that was Doug Pederson. You heard it. Look, you like that sort of openness from the coach. I know fans haven't forgotten about that crash down, and he even talked about hoping that some of the players wouldn't forget what that feeling felt like. That extra motivation. You hear guys talk about it. There's always some sort of extra motivation that can pop up, and for the guys that are going to be back on the team this next season, you hope they do use that as motivation. That's what he said, and I couldn't agree with him more because look, that was. I mean, you go 8-3. You were in the conversation for the top seed. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, but that was the reality of the situation. And I hope that sticks with him. I hope that sticks with the players. I mean, it's surely going to stick with the fans, and I can guarantee you, us in the media ain't going to forget neither next time if they roll out to 8-3.
It's almost I see the equivalent. People remember the Buffalo Bills for all their success.
Right.
You lost 4 straight Super Bowls, and it was just that collapse at the finish. Or Buffalo. In hindsight, now you recognize, man, what they accomplished in getting to 4 straight Super Bowls was pretty remarkable. But in the mindset, they were referred to as the lovable losers because you just could not close. So you don't forget those collapses, no matter how good the season is up until a certain point. And you can even look back a year before. Where's the inverse of that? Where Jacksonville caught fire at the end, and had they lost in Week 18 to the Titans in 2022, you would have still remembered that great finish and how close it was for that. But to be 8-3, you're basically in the playoffs at that point. I mean, before the Bengals came to town, you're number 1 seed in the whole AFC. Playoffs are running through Jacksonville. Unreal. So the collapse kind of fits in, again, to the national narrative about Jags. It's never positive, never good. It's always how bad the Jags are, how terrible of a city this is. Terrible.
To be fair, for the better part of 30 years, the team has been bad.
Has been bad.
To be fair, like I will defend Jacksonville to nauseum when people have things to say, and I will defend the current Jaguars. But to be fair,
Not wrong.
Over the course of their history, the majority of time, if the national media said how bad the team was, they were not wrong.
They're not wrong. Not wrong. They had, I mean, this winds back to pre-Jacksonville getting the team. I mean, there's such a angst and unbelievable unforgivingness that Jacksonville was awarded an NFL franchise over St. Louis, and I think you wind the clock back to then. That's where the hate comes from. Jacksonville's such a small town comparatively to some of these other NFL markets. So I think the vitriol goes back even before Jacksonville got the NFL franchise. But again, the narrative on Jacksonville has not been good, not been forgiving in a sense. I mean, I remember one analyst saying when Jacksonville clinched the number 1 draft pick, Trevor should sit out or they should have to forfeit the number 1 draft pick so Trevor wouldn't have to play in Jacksonville. So it's always been an unfair narrative against Jacksonville. But yes, if you're 8-3, going back to this, 8-3, you've got to make the playoffs. There's no reason that should have happened. At 8-3, you cannot fumble and finish like you did last year. And sure, I mean, Doug, that it should stay with you like a stain. It should stay with you like a stain. I'm sure for Trevor, he feels that way. I'm sure for Christian, the veterans in the locker room, yeah, it's a stain. You can't get rid of that. You can't get rid of that.
No, you can't. All right, you mentioned Trevor Lawrence. So part of the Jaguars' future, whether it's going to be going uphill or downhill, is what happens with Trevor Lawrence. Some people have started to ask questions about where he ranks in the league as far as quarterbacks. Should Trevor Lawrence get an extension this offseason? Last season was definitely not his finest hour, especially not in that last game. I know there's some definitely plays that he would like to have back, that Doug Pederson would like to have back. But Doug Pederson made it clear that he has not lost any sort of confidence in Trevor Lawrence. He knows there are mistakes, but he thinks that all the mistakes that Trevor's made up to this point are all still correctable.
Yeah, you can. You can fix it. And, obviously, interceptions are going to happen, but it's the pocket stuff, right? It's the fumbling in the pocket, out of the pocket. That's the part that we can help him with, the ball security stuff. And just got to get – it's hard for young players because they feel like they can make every play. And it's okay to throw the ball away. We just got to keep educating him, in these situations. And but yeah, you can coach it, but you are the guy that's touching the ball every snap. So we got to make smart decisions too.
All right, you like to hear that sort of confidence from the coach. Some of the mistakes that Trevor's made, I think they are controllable. My confidence, at least to where he is or what he can be, hasn't really been shaken. Last season, I'm willing to, look, players get hurt, injuries happen, guys have bad seasons because of those injuries. You try and play through them, deal with them. This stuff happens. It's part of the NFL. It's happened to many a player. Trevor's not the first. He won't be the last where injuries derail a year for a guy. Now, he does have to come back and rebound, because we do need to still see it for a full slate of games from him, because that's what we haven't seen yet. That's the next step.
I mean, with Trevor, I think it is absolutely fair to ask if Trevor is the guy. Okay, Trevor has been in Jacksonville 3 years. 3 years. Would you say 2 of those years, 3 of those years, 1 of those years was good, half of a year? What would you say Trevor, his if you look at Trevor as a whole, 3 years in Jacksonville, what's the Trevor? What's the kind of the breakdown on Trevor? What's the analysis of Trevor? He's had 2 very years. I mean, he's not had that great time in Jacksonville. So I do think it's fair to ask, especially when you look at guys in his draft class being jettisoned and shipped off. I mean, Zach Wilson's still with his team, but probably not for long. Mac Jones is in Jacksonville, traded from New England. I mean, you've got guys, Trevor's draft class, that have kind of been farmed out and given up on. I don't think Trevor's in that chasm at all. I think he's going to be the best quarterback out of that class. But what is...
Does he have any competition? He's already the best quarterback out of that class.
Brock Purdy?
Okay, Brock was in that year. All right, that's fine.
So
that's fine.
I think, I do think it's fair to ask if Trevor is the guy from what we've seen so far. And I think, to your point, injuries last year absolutely affected it, his effectiveness. And I think the Urban Meyer year you have to kind of discount. So we've seen probably, would you say, how many games would you put on Trevor where you've seen like total A-list kind of quarterback, top 10 quarterback in his time in Jacksonville?
The back half of that playoff season 2 years ago.
That's probably 9 games, something like that.
Back half of that. But, notice what you just said. You said, all right, well, we're not going to hold the Urban Meyer year against him. So, essentially, Doug Pederson walked in with a rookie. So a rookie quarterback who was learning for the first half of the season, made some silly mistakes, and then all of a sudden light comes on. So that's why the expectations were through the roof for this next season. And then you had offensive line issues, and he started getting banged up really early. Once the team started to kind of click and figure it out, the injury set in. First it was what? First it was the ankle. Then it was the Then it was the concussion. I think the knee was twisted up somewhere. He was banged up.
Yeah, and then the shoulder, which actually kept him out of games.
Shoulder at the end, a concussion at the end. I mean, he was banged up. He was part of the banged up crew at the end of the season. But he was banged up early in the season, then, and that kind of stretched through. And Doug Pederson has even admitted it postseason that maybe they over course corrected with Trevor. After that knee injury, they started to they stopped doing things they wanted to do with the offense, like put him on the move, bootlegs, and things like that, because they were trying to protect him to make sure the ankle didn't get worse or any of the other injuries didn't progress. And Doug said, look, maybe we over course corrected, and we never got back to doing those things over the course of the year. I mean, that's kind of human error, right? Yeah. I mean, that happens as you're trying to protect guys. You got a guy who's hurt. You're trying to figure it out. That changes the offense away from what you wanted it to be going into the year. And sometimes those changes aren't the right ones. Yeah. And this go around, it wasn't ideal.
Yeah, and I do think, again, that Jacksonville's going to have to make a pricey decision on Trevor this offseason to pick up his fifth-year option, which they will. He'll be making.
Oh yeah, fifth-year option's not a.
He'll be making $25 million next year on his fifth-year option.
Maybe.
If
he plays on the fifth-year option.
He play, yeah. Well, a lot of times they got to do, and they'll sign him after that. You're playing that option and then get it. But
my money's on they sign him before training camp.
You think so? Okay.
My money's on Trevor's deal's done before camp.
Interesting. Okay, I would be the opposite. I would say
same timeline as Justin Herbert. I'm not saying that's what I would do. My money is on, like, Justin Herbert signed his deal right before training camp last year. My money's on same timeline.
Okay, all right.
I think he's gonna get a deal.
Okay, I'm of the opposite standing. I think it'll be a little bit of time. I think it'll be next year. I think Trevor and his agents will want to revisit it when the salary cap continues to climb.
But safe money.
Safe money, that's
guaranteed
true.
money.
That's true.
As you can count guaranteed money, as opposed to if he goes and has a injury-riddled season or a rocky season again, all of a sudden that contract might not look as good.
Okay, so my question on Trevor.
Okay, what's your question?
He's
played, I know Kirk Cousins. I know.
He's had 51 potential regular season games. He's missed one, right?
Yeah.
Played 50 regular season games, 2 playoff games. How many of those games would you say Trevor's been kind of the guy you thought he was going to be in those games?
Like off the top of my head?
Off the top of your head. Ballpark number.
Oh, man. I mean, of those, maybe it's got to be 10 or less, right?
Yeah, I would say probably 10 to 12.
Where I felt like he really dictated the action and did the thing? Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's somewhere in that like 10, maybe low teens range at best.
So, yeah, and I'm like of the – like that's a small sample size.
It is.
If you going into your fourth. This year is so significantly big. You cannot undersell how big this year is for Trevor Lawrence and this offense to make that. I mean, for you to see, not necessarily the generational kind of word we've thrown around, but you need to see that taking over a game kind of good. You need to break in. And I go back to what Jamal and I said like 2 years ago. If Trevor can be that top 12 quarterback in the league, this team's going to make the playoffs.
Sure.
And I think that's the same thing. I think if Trevor can be, he was not even near a top 15 quarterback last year with all of his issues.
And here's the thing. I mean, supporting cast makes a difference in these things.
Yeah.
I mean, like everybody loves to talk about Justin Herbert, who maybe hasn't been on the trajectory that people thought he would be on, but he walked into a situation where he had Keenan Allen, who was a fantastic receiver. He's still a fantastic receiver years later. He had Mike Williams, fantastic receiver when he's healthy. He's been banged up. Austin Eckler, who there was a fantastic running back, who signed another contract. I mean, injuries have caught up with him now, but he had a cast around him of playmakers. I mean, Trevor walked in the door to DJ Chark, who's been bouncing around the league, Laviska Shenault, who went to Carolina still. I'm not sure if he's on the roster, hasn't done much. Marvin Jones, who, look, this wasn't the Marvin Jones of old. Like, they traded for Dan Arnold to be a playmaker. I'm not sure Dan Arnold's still in the league. Like, the Jaguars moved on from, and I don't think anybody came a-calling. If they did, he definitely ain't playing. And I remember that season, Dan Arnold was like the Jags' top playmaker. So, I mean, it's not like he walked into a situation like Bryce Young last season. Like, so the same reason why everybody's like, let's take a second on Bryce. It could all come together for him. You kind of got to do the same thing here. Like, you kind of got to take a deep breath. That first season, nothing was there.
Throw that away.
And then you go to the second season where the light comes on a little bit toward the end as he has these pieces around him. I still wouldn't say he has a top 10 supporting cast in the league.
No.
So, and then the third season, they try and improve it, make some improvements here or there. Calvin Ridley was still figuring out his way into this offense and where he fit, and then Trevor gets hurt. And then the offense changes. And then the offensive line was a revolving door that didn't help anybody. So you got a hurt quarterback with an offensive line that's not doing great. Like, that's a recipe for disaster. Like, I get it. People want more from Trevor. 100%. He was the number 1 overall pick. He's billed as the guy that's going to be the superstar quarterback. I understand it. I really do. And I get the questions. I do think they're warranted. But at the same time, football is a team game.
Let people see him with a stack deck, right? First time.
Let's just, not even a stack deck. Just an even card.
Just a deck.
Just a deck. I'm telling you, we can go through all these quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes walked into the door with Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
Travis Kelce. Aaron Rodgers, when he was up in Green Bay, for as much grief as the Packers got for never investing heavily in wide receiver, he was throwing to some guys. Like, Jordy Nelson was pretty good. You know what I mean? He was never just barren,
right?
Well, like wasteland of who's he throwing to until maybe toward the end where they started pulling some of those other guys. But even since then, a lot of those guys like MVS that people were like, oh, who is he throwing to? MVS has made a nice career for himself. So these top quarterbacks, they don't do it alone. And we were talking trash about, Patrick Mahomes did a little bit of it last year, making something out of nothing with those wide receivers.
Ooh.
But again, when it was a big moment, who was he throwing to? I don't care who the wide receiver is. They could pick a wide receiver in the first round this year. In the biggest moment of the game, he's throwing the ball to Travis Kelce. In the biggest moment of the game, who is Trevor throwing the ball to as a rookie?
Elijah Cooks. No, last year he was.
But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And right now it's Christian Kirk. At the end of last season, Trevor is beat up to the teeth in, and Christian Kirk wasn't out there.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's not a shot at Evan Ingram or anybody, but Christian is his safety valve. Christian is he's paid to be your best offensive player. So I'm okay. Like, I think the flashes are there, and I understand why they're just flashes. If you go back and watch some of them games, dude was throwing to Laquan Treadwell.
Yeah.
Very nice guy. I like Tread. Got along with him. Always enjoyed talking to him while he was here. But he's far from a superstar wide receiver in the NFL.
First round pick.
He was far from a superstar wide receiver in the NFL. You got to give the guy a shot.
Yeah.
Even Mac Jones. That's the reason Mac's probably gonna get another shot somewhere in the NFL at some point. Because what did he have around him in New England?
Oh yeah, nothing.
He didn't even have an offensive coordinator last season. He'll get another shot for that alone. It's the reason why people gave up on Trey Lance, because Trey Lance walked into San Francisco with everything there.
Yep.
And couldn't make it work. It's the same reason why people are critical of Brock Purdy, because he has such a strong supporting cast, and they're like, could he do that if it wasn't as strong of a cast? That's the difference. Like, now, that's the same reason why people are so high on CJ, though.
Right.
Because CJ's supporting cast isn't crazy strong. They got some talent, but it's not like through the roof. I wouldn't say he has a top 5 supporting cast in the league, but he walked in and raised everybody's game. So, you want to see a quarterback that can do that, and that is a challenge, but quarterbacks that can do that are few and far between. Like, if you say right now, rattle off the quarterbacks that can raise the rest of the team's game.
We talked about this. We talked about generational quarterback kind of guy.
Yes.
Michael Vick, Patrick Mahomes. We've had this conversation.
100%.
Manning, and those guys just don't grow on trees.
They do not grow on trees, and that's not a shot. So Trevor needs talent around him. People love Aaron Rodgers. The Jets are trying to put talent around Aaron to make sure that he can be successful. That's what you got to do. And as of yet, the Jaguars have they kind of stuck their foot in the water. But they haven't really jumped in head first to like make sure. Like think about Peyton Manning. How when he was with the Broncos or the Colts, they doubled down. They sacrificed defense to put all of the offensive talent and firepower they could around this dude to say, he's got guys. So he's going to go out there and deal.
He always had a great offensive line, and he always had guys to throw to.
That's it.
Dallas Clark, Marvin Harrison, I mean, those guys in Indianapolis.
Emmanuel Sanders, when he gets to Denver, they go get him. I can't remember who the other receiver was they had there. But I know he played with Wes Welker there in Denver. There was somebody else, too. It'll come to me later.
Demaryius Thomas?
Demaryius Thomas, who was really good.
Yeah.
So, look, they made sure that they surrounded Peyton with nothing but talent. As of yet, the Jaguars have left a little bit of something to be desired.
Yep.
So that might bring us to our next topic. All right, so the wide receiver group is part of the conversation with Calvin Ridley walking. Folks have been falling in love with some of these wide receivers. One of the things that Doug kind of said is, look, the wide receiver room on their roster is not a finished product, but he does like what he's seen from at least the rookie wide receiver class so far in his research.
I mean, we're going to consider and look and see if we can continue to add. I mean, yeah, we're going to add receivers, and we're not, we need 15 or 16 guys going into training camp, so we're going to add guys, right? We're not where we need to be. It's not the final product, but look, if there's somebody sitting there that makes you better, you can do everything you can to try to do that. So it's we talked about it. It's a good receiver group this year, and if you can always add talent wherever you can.
All right, so with Doug liking the wide receiver class in this draft room, but he does say he feels pretty good about the wide receivers they have, but it's not a finished picture. There are still some free agent wide receivers. Like I've sat here and mentioned can't guard Michael Thomas as an option, as a guy who would make sense to add another dynamic to the wide receiver room. But I know people are falling in love with the draft class, so I know a lot of people are just going to be excited to hear Doug say he likes this year's class.
I've got to call BS on Doug.
Yeah?
You cannot sit here and tell me with a straight face that you are comfortable with your receiver room. That you added Gabe Davis,
yes,
who's never had more than 48 catches in a year. Yeah, he offers some vertical ability, which you didn't have, the field burner kind of guy. But you lost Calvin Ridley, you replaced him with Gabe Davis. I don't feel that's an even trade-off. And your receivers last year were just okay. I mean, so the Calvin Ridley, Gabe Davis, Gabe Davis is still a ways away from catching Calvin, in my opinion. And that's who you're – no, I don't care. You got to give Trevor something else to work with. You're kidding yourself, Doug. You cannot be serious that you like your receiver. Gabe Davis is a fine 2 or 3. I am not comfortable going into this season with running back the same offensive line, essentially, and with the exception of Mitch Morris – and that receiving core. You've got to invest at receiver, be it draft, free agency, make a swing for T. Higgins, something. Doug is lying through his teeth. Look, I can't believe it.
I don't doubt that I don't think you're wrong. I do think that Doug is probably he's gonna make everything sound great, because I think part of it is he has to, and I think the other part is he's not gonna create panic to say that they have to go at a position in the first round.
It reminds me of last year with the offensive line. The conversations pre-season with Trent and Doug, and you're running it back with this offensive line.
Yeah.
Everybody could see there was an issue with the offensive line. For one, you lost Jawan Taylor, replaced with Anton, kind of a wash there, but it just was not a good. And we saw that. We saw that come to fruition early on in the season with how bad and beaten up Trevor was. The offensive line couldn't clear a running lane for Travis Etienne. Nope. And to me, this reminds me of last year, those conversations about the offensive line, because you chose to run it back with making very minor moves, and you see what happened. It was an eyesore. It was a reason for the team's struggles last year. You got your franchise quarterback beat up and beaten down. So I just don't think you can make the same argument about your receivers. You're fine. When you lose Calvin Ridley, replace him with Gabe Davis, and you're not making another move to get a T. Higgins kind of guy in here, somebody of that stature, and invest a high draft pick. And you got to do something. I cannot believe Doug Pederson is saying, I'm fine with the offense. I'm fine with receivers.
Look, And there's a part of me that says I don't think he's necessarily lying completely. Like, I think he does want to add something to that receiver room, but maybe Doug isn't as locked in on having to be a first-round wide receiver as everybody else is. Like, you got to keep in mind, this guy's never really had, like, a true superstar wide receiver. Even in his time in Philly, it was like Alshon Jeffrey, who was toward the end of his career. He's never had this big superstar-level talent at receiver. So you add in a guy like, I don't know, throw out a name. Maybe the Jags add Xavier Worthy, who, ran that crazy 40-yard dash time. Everybody loves him. Maybe they get him in the second round. He's not a huge guy, so he's not the big 6'4", big body type that people want, but he's the burner that they haven't had here in Jacksonville in a long time. And all of a sudden, maybe you got yourself a nice little mix of some guys. Look, you got Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and then you throw in another guy, and maybe they have a nice rotation. I know that's not what you want. I know that's not what we've talked about, but I'm just trying to look into what he's done in his history. He's never had the closest thing to the best receiver that Doug Pederson, at least talent-wise, has probably ever coached in his time as a head coach anyway. Got to be Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, probably so.
It's got to be
Alshon Jeffrey?
I mean, Alshon Jeffrey was toward the end of his career when Doug had him. I mean, he was injury-riddled toward the end of his career. Like, Alshon was fantastic in Chicago. In Philly, I mean, by the time Doug was there as the head coach, like that Super Bowl run, it wasn't Alshon making all them plays. So, look, and that's nothing against Alshon. Again, like I think Alshon was fantastic. He was one of my favorite players in the league at the time. But Doug hasn't had a lot of superstar receivers. So maybe, just maybe, that ain't as high on his priority list as some of us think it is. Or maybe he thinks Gabe Davis is going to be able to take that next step and be more consistent here.
I don't see it. I mean, if somebody has shown you who they are in the NFL, which
you gotta believe them.
Which Gabe Davis has.
That's in life. That's not just the NFL.
Yeah, well, yeah. Like this is your body of work. This is who you are. There may be some deviation in it, but I mean, Alshon. He's not going to go from. Gabe Davis is not going to go from 48 receptions in a year to 95 and a 1,400-yard receiver. He's just not going to be that guy. I think Gabe Davis is a good second, third option. I mean, he gives Jacksonville something that they don't have and haven't had for quite some time. I like the signing as I don't like $39 million as a number 3 receiver, but he fills a need where he can come in and give you 50, 60 catches a year. I like that. But they're missing that Calvin Ridley guy, and Christian Kirk is not that. Christian's great at his role, but who is going to be that big-time, big-bodied receiver who you've not had in Jacksonville since Allen Robinson? I think you need that.
I think we get to this point, and we always say that they haven't had in Jacksonville. There's a lot of things that the Jaguars haven't had in a long time. There's just a lot of things that have been missing. So, look, we'll see. And maybe they do. This is a deep wide receiver class. Yeah. So, I mean, just because he doesn't, say, we got to do this in the first round, we got to go get a superstar guy, it doesn't mean that he can't get a guy in the second round. Like I said a minute ago, maybe Xavier Worthy in the second round. It's not the big, tall guy. Like, I'm a fan of Keon Coleman in the second round, don't get me wrong. But maybe they go a different route. We'll see. Another spot that's at least popular amongst fans for that first-round pick. I know Justin likes this one. I'm not on my list right now, but it's possible. It is possible, depending on how the board shakes out. Cornerback.
Yep.
Doug Pederson talked a little bit about his cornerback room. I'm not sure Justin's going to like what Doug had to say about the cornerback room either, but Doug seems to think that their cornerback room is pretty good where it's at, and he'll kind of mention something that we'll play some more sound and let him expand on in a minute. But Doug says he feels like he's got Tyson, Ronald Darby, and Darnell Savage, who was signed as a safety. So they kind of feel pretty good about where their cornerback room is.
I feel good. I do feel good. Ronald Darby, who we had in Philly and added that piece, obviously, and with Tyson back there, and now with Darnell adding that mix, we got, as we mentioned, Antonio, and we got some young players that have played, and Monteric and stuff like that. I mean, it's obviously a position that we're always gonna, it's a passing league, right? So you got to have defenders, and you got to have guys that can cover the pass. But you also have guys too. I mean, in our division, you're gonna, there's no shortage of running backs, so they're gonna have to be physical and tackle as well. And so, but I feel like we've improved. And we still have the draft ahead of us and all of that, so we'll see where this thing shakes out.
All right, so that kind of leads us to this. Before we dive into the cornerback room as a whole, I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about Savage.
Do it.
Since he mentioned it, since he's counted Savage when he talked about the cornerback room, we thought Darnell Savage was a safety. We thought he was a replacement for Rayshon Jenkins, or at least I did. But and I know Justin did. That's what we kind of agreed on. But it sounds like they view Savage as their slot corner. Doug spent some time to explain on it. He said that's kind of what Ryan wants to do, and thinks that having Savage as your nickel corner, which you're in nickel in 80 to 90% of the time in the NFL, and Antonio Johnson is more of your Rayshon Jenkins replacement, that defense now has a lot more flexibility because Antonio can also play some of that slot role for the defense.
He'll compete at that spot, but he goes in right now, as the one, right there, and then you got Antonio in the back end, with Cisco back there. So it's a good little mix of guys.
So you see Antonio as the replacement for Rayshon, though?
I think so. Moving forward, I think that's the thing. But he can also compete, at nickel as well.
It gives you flexibility.
It gives you flex. Exactly.
All right, so a lot of people at least tabbing cornerback as a huge need. Maybe not as big of a need as we previously thought. If the plan is for Savage to be your nickel, then your starters could be set if they feel comfortable with Darby. Now, Darby's contract does not have to lock him in as a starter. He could 100% be a depth player. But the understanding, at least as of right now, and the way they have approached this, is that they think Darby's at least penciled in as a starter for now.
That's fine. That's something we talked about previously with the possibility of a Jeff Okudah type player coming to Jacksonville and having your number 1 draft pick or second round pick come in and play that nickel corner if need be, whatever the case may be. I mean, you need a long-term guy at that cornerback position. I mean, Tyson's in his final year of his contract. He's going to be costly next year to bring back, re-sign. Andre Cisco, last year of his deal, he's going to be costly to bring back and re-sign. So, Jamal's made some talking about offensive tackle or whatever. You're going to lose some of those guys next year besides an Anton Harrison type, and looking forward a little bit into the future. And I think this is the cornerback position is one where you have to do that. I mean, Darby's not a long-term answer at the corner, just like Darius Williams would not have been a long-term answer just in terms of years and stuff. You got to get a guy and develop him and draft him. And I think that corner is still a possibility for that first-round pick. I just do. I think you need it. The nickel guy, I mean, how many times in the NFL are you going to see a non-nickel position? I think Doug said it this week, where you're nickel about 75-80% of the time. That's just a remarkable amount of time to have those 5 DBs on the field. So I think you need one. I think you draft one early in the first 2 rounds, and no matter how that board falls, I mean, it could be a pick at 17, it could be a pick in those late 40s too.
But if the plan is for Savage to be that nickel, now you're spending that 17th pick on a guy who has to go in and beat out a veteran to play. And if let's say he loses the job to Darby early on, since they've, at least as of right now, penciled him in as his starting corner. So now you got 17 sitting on the bench?
I don't know. I think you kind of let him try and beat him out. I don't know. I mean, I think first you take best player available. And
let's rewind here. All right, no, because now we're going down. Let's say we talked about edge and offensive tackle, not needs, but the hang up for a lot of people is, so you want to use a first round pick on a guy that's going to sit on the bench and watch, right? But edge rotates heavily,
right?
Offensive tackle doesn't. But there's a possibility of being able to move on from a guy to create a spot there.
Right.
But at corner, if Darby's your starter,
Darby's a 1-year rental to me.
He is a 1-year rental. Cam's a 1-year rental. Josh Allen, as of right now, is a 1-year rental. Why are those situations different? Darby's on a 2-year contract. Cam and Josh Allen are on 1-year deals as of right now.
True. And are you confident Antonio Johnson's the answer at safety?
No.
Are you confident that he's a second-year guy? He's never really started in that role, and you're going to plug him in? So I do think there are variables now in terms of you draft a guy. I mean, you obviously have your quote-unquote starters set right now with Darby and Savage and Tyson and Cisco and Johnson, but you got to plan for injury. You've got to plan for future. And I do think that Darby, you look at his contract situation, he's a veteran. You can move on from him probably next year without significant cap penalty. And I do think you pair a young draft pick with a Tyson to let those guys grow.
Or Oh, well, Tyson is technically on the last year of his deal. So, okay. So, Tyson's in the same boat as the Cam and Josh. I forgot about that one while we were talking about it. But maybe, like in the second round, third round, you draft a guy for those positions where they're going to watch. I think it depends on how comfortable they are with Darby starting. But I think that is the big question mark. If they think that they're comfortable with him starting, if they brought him here to be a starter for the short term, then you probably go corner a little bit later instead of going first round. If you're serious about having a safety play that nickel role, which Savage kind of alluded to in his introductory press conference. We were talking to him. He said, I think I can be a weapon all over the defense and do all this stuff. And now Doug's saying he's your nickel. And Antonio Johnson played some nickel last year. So, I mean, he has the flexibility to go down into the slot. So that just gives you a ton of flexibility. So I could see why a defensive coordinator would really be interested in doing that.
Absolutely. And Doug has mentioned it. Nielsen has mentioned it about positional versatility and how important that is. And if you've seen Jacksonville's draft and develop kind of things, you've got guys who they've taken in the past who have that positional versatility. You may have played one position in college and they're counting on you to move somewhere else. I mean, when Josh Allen was drafted, what is Josh? Is he an edge? Is he a defensive end? Is he an outside linebacker? What is he? He played a little bit everywhere. Trayvon Walker, another guy with that positional versatility, high round draft pick, number one draft pick. So I do think that you saw Antonio Johnson last year. We had conversations amongst ourselves. Is he a nickel? Can he play that nickel spot, or is he truly a safety? And I still think that's a question to be answered. Where does Antonio fit in this mix? So I do think corner at number 17, if that's where they wanted to go, would be good. But I do think you got to draft the best guy available, Brock Bowers.
Whoever the best guy on the board is what they need to do.
I think
but I do think putting Savage at the nickel, since that's the plan, changes the equation a little bit. I think that does back off at least a little bit of the urgency, because before it felt like, well, you got to get a guy who can start in the slot this year. But if you brought in Savage with this plan, and right now you're penciling in Antonio, I mean, you might say, all right, well, now late in the draft, maybe you're drafting another safety to bring in as competition, or they're going to be looking for another veteran safety if the plan is to truly lock Savage in there. But we'll see how it all shakes out. We'll have some more draft focused podcasts coming your way here over the next couple of weeks, as we're now less than a month out from the draft.
Man,
so we're going to start counting down. We got to get all this content out, because next thing you know, it's going to be draft day. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the News4JAGs podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're at, and we'll see you here next time.